Music. It was part of the fabric of American history from our earliest days, inspiring our colonial forefathers to prayer, inspiration, relaxation, and love. Music was part of every conversation in society, a rallying point for centers of the arts in the New World, and a measure of any new American city's social progress. If you had a thriving music culture, you had begun to achieve social parity with England and Europe. Now, SIGAL Music Museum is proud to bring forward Sounds of America, an exhibition touching on many of the high points of musical instrument and musical style development from colonial times up to the late 20th century. While no museum is large enough to give so broad a subject a full and complete review, we have assembled a small but powerful collection of firsts, including the first piano commercially made and sold in America, the first upright piano, and the first piano with a cast iron frame, the oldest Steinway grand piano in original condition, the first blues recording, as well as the first jazz record. These firsts are complemented by many fine examples of American musical efforts that fill in the gaps after an innovation was begun, and are represented by actual instruments, music, and period recordings. The exhibit, brought to life by curator Thomas Strange, adjunct curator Alexandra Cade, and executive director David Sims, is a rich cross-section of the museum's holdings in American musical arts. Let's look at a preview of this exhibit from the perspective of the newly arriving visitor. We first encounter a unique square piano made by the firm Loudon Brothers in Philadelphia in 1824, expressly for the use of General Marquis de Lafayette on his return to America after a 40-year absence. The piano contains design elements of heroic proportions, with basalt-inspired columns, highly figured woods, brass inlay, and a massive carved bass, in the exuberant style of 1820s high fashion. It was a period of neoclassical excess, and we will encounter this aesthetic again shortly on our tour. No other piano made by the Loudon Brothers firm ever came close to this design, and their notice in the Philadelphia Inquirer describes it fairly carefully. It is a special piece of Americana. Welcoming us to the exhibit is a specially commissioned art piece that captures the strongest elements of the exhibit, and executed for the museum by noted artist Gray Thompson. The first station displays 3 keyboards from early America, a 1748 spinet harpsichord by Jacob Kirkman of London and imported into New Haven, Connecticut for Hezekiah Brainerd. It provided music for the Brainerd family throughout the second half of the 18th century. It is flanked by a piano that is perhaps the most important American-made instrument in the collection, or any collection, the grand piano by John Barrett, made in Philadelphia in 1775. Barrett advertised this piano for sale in the Pennsylvania Packet shortly before the Revolutionary War broke out, and given Barrett's involvement in the war effort as a private, and the intense focus on war-related economy that stopped nearly all traffic in luxury items, it is likely the only one he ever completed. Another piano in the grouping is a square piano by Charles and Elizabeth Tawes of Philadelphia and made in 1794 for David Rittenhouse. The Tawes piano represents the beginning of a real interest in piano building in America and would be followed by many immigrant and native builders. In the second station, we find the innovations in piano building with the earliest style upright piano by John Hawkins, probably also made in Philadelphia about 1802, but taken back to London when Hawkins returned to claim a legacy, and relabeled as being made in London to help it sell better. It has the first iron frame of any piano, but it is a composite, made of pieces bolted together, and needed further refinement to succeed. Hawkins was interested in abstract invention and engineering, but was not adept at making his inventions work well. The square piano by Alpheus Babcock is the earliest surviving full cast iron frame piano ever made, and in this case the invention is well developed and entirely successful. Babcock patented this idea and pursued the patent vigorously against anyone trying to copy it, such that his competitors were reduced to casting doubt in the minds of buyers on whether it imparted a metallic tone to the music. Babcock eventually persuaded the firm of Chickering to produce full iron frame pianos under a new patent in 1840, and by the middle of the 19th century, every square piano made in America would have this feature. We then encounter a Steinway Concert Grand, the oldest one that survives, with all of the original strings and action intact. This piano was the winner of a contest sponsored by Steinway to find the oldest Steinway piano in private hands, held in 2003. A full-size Concert Grand, it is the very last grand piano Steinway made before switching to the overstrung design, which has been a feature in Steinway grand pianos ever since. This straight-strung grand is then a teaching tool for any student of piano development, representing a point in young Henry Steinway's innovative thinking that is captured nowhere else in the world. The third station represents the women's parlor, a place for ladies to receive guests and entertain them with musical skills acquired in their youth. It features a piano made in 1834 by Robert Nunn's Clark & Company of New York City, and bought for Eliza Lyles by her father, Austin P., for her wedding and 18th birthday present. It has been in South Carolina its whole life, narrowly escaping the destructive path of Sherman's army in 1865, when Eliza so charmed the soldiers that her piano was spared. Her portrait hangs above the piano. The second piano in this display is by the then recent immigrant Emilius N. Schur, a highly decorated and ornate piano from 1825 that conjures the exuberant design spirit of the 1820s in America, with neoclassical motifs over the whole piano and a brown and gold color scheme. Over this piano hangs the portrait of a young lady who has just won an award for her efforts on the piano, and of which she is quite proud. Painted by the Boston artist Henry Williams in a semi-primitive style, she holds up her ribbon and gold ring while seated at her Boston-made piano in her best velvet dress. European grand pianos were often used in mid-19th century American concert halls, as American builders concentrated on building the more egalitarian square pianos. The Broadwood & Sons from 1845 would have been at home on any stage in America during this time, and the 1863 Erard might represent the last of the European piano representatives. By the 1870s, American dominance in piano making and the push to make concert grands by Steinway, Chickering, and others meant that grand pianos became almost all American and began to be seriously exported to Europe. The World's Fair of 1939 was an opportunity for America to show off everything that was new and exciting, and the Art Deco-designed Storytone upright piano, voiced by RCA, and all-electronic magnetic pickup replacing the usual soundboard was truly innovative. Our piano was sold at that fair in 1939 and taken to California before World War II broke out. It is all original and plays well even today. It features a radio and phonograph in the bench, perhaps to play along with as you sat at the piano. Next to the Storytone is a 1957 Hammond B3 organ and Leslie rotating speaker. Developed in 1935 and also exhibited at the 1939 World's Fair, Hammond continued his development of the electronic organ. The B3 is arguably the best of the models. It has been adopted and recorded by hundreds of jazz and rock artists, as well as churches across America in the 20th century. It is flanked by an organ made in New York City in 1825 by Adam and William Gieb, a firm noted for piano making. This organ, from over 100 years before the Hammond, was made for much of the same purpose, as a chamber organ capable of giving a full sound in a relatively small space. Our last stop on the first floor is to admire a harpsichord not from the distant past, but from the 21st century. Made in 2003 by the noted builder Richard Kingston in North Carolina as a special commission from Elaine Finaro, this harpsichord was intended as a vehicle for hearing the harpsichord make new music from recently commissioned composers through the celebrated Alienor competition. It is decorated by artist Lisa Creed of Durham, North Carolina, who painted the lid with an abstract representation which flows beyond its boundaries onto the case. On the left side of the lid is an icon representing the composer's score and the performer's realization with resultant emanations of sound. The second floor invites us to look at how music has been created, recorded, and distributed in America, with a particular nod towards black musical artists' contributions to new genres. We first encounter a section dedicated to the work of Huddie Ledbetter, better known as Leadbelly, and local blues artist Josh White. These two artists collaborated later in life, and both led social change and protests against the Jim Crow South through their songs. The display features many original albums and listening stations for hearing their music. It also features Josh White's 1943 Martin guitar that he played throughout his career, including the White House, as the first black artist to be invited to perform for a sitting president. There is also a special display of the model used by sculptor Joe Thompson to create the Josh White sculpture in downtown Greenville. The other side of this display contains music and instruments from American gospel and shape note singing, with a dulcimer by William Young and a psaltery used by Betty Smith of North Carolina. Above it hangs the prayer trumpet from the Shady Grove campground, which called African American guests to daily worship and fellowship while they were on retreat and vacation. This display is opposite a similar case where we can find many of the zithers, auto harps, and other mechanical string devices that were prominent during the zither craze in America between 1885 and 1925. This leads us around to Buddy Moss and local legend Mac Arnold, who together represent over 100 years of Chicago and Texas blues expression and continue through Mac Arnold today. His gas can guitar is featured prominently. The other side of this case shows the early development of jazz, from Buddy Bolden and Bunk Johnson through Louis Armstrong in the first jazz recording by the original Dixieland Jazz Band, to Duke Ellington, and then Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie. The center of the room focuses on the technology of recording and distributing music, with the first radios through the hi-fi era to the ultra-micro radios found today. A second side shows how home recording development was created, from bulky disc recordings to tape, cassette tape, the compact disc, and finally, the Walkman and iPod. Black artists were among the very first recording stars, and we offer up a tribute to 10 brilliant black musicians who changed the world through their music between 1900 and 1930. With a listening station to play each song, the visitor can examine the origin of recording itself and the sometimes awkward position black artists found themselves in, as with Bert Williams, who was forced to perform in blackface. We have the first blues recording, Bessie Smith's first hit, as well as the first hit records of Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday. In the corner of the second floor, a recording studio is set up, allowing the visitor to experiment with various settings on an 8-channel mixing board and see what would have been a typical setup in a mid-1960s studio. It features period drums, amps, bass and lead guitars, and a Fender Rhodes keyboard. The John H. Williams Music Store was active in Greenville from 1905 until around 1920, set up in the first floor of the Grand Opera House. A representation of this storefront can be found on the second floor, featuring sheet music, instruments and phonographs, and other items that would have been purchased by Greenvillians in the early 20th century. The guitar display has a small selection of mandolins, banjos, and guitars from the 1870s to the 1990s. Also showing are two very early keyboards made in America in the late 18th century, with a 20th century hammer dulcimer. The final room uses records and album covers to trace the development of swing, rock and roll, rap, and exotica in America, using actual records by the pioneering artists who would later be recognized as founders. The visitor is invited to read through the descriptions and listen to the music, and to leave comments. We also show a large variety of later jazz recordings and highlights from the American musical. The center and front of the room feature American-made square pianos, which the visitor can examine up close. These represent the early yearning in America to join with the rest of the world as an equal partner in the production of music, a goal which we achieved and possibly surpassed. Sounds of America can never hope to tell every story of American music, but offering a broad variety of instruments, recordings, music, and music transmission through radio and other means, we hope to inspire the visitor to explore more and learn. Music is at its most rewarding when we understand it better, and Sounds of America offers a fine place to start.